I am, Sawyer. I'm glad you're here too. We've had a great time these last couple of days. Yesterday, we got to tour, Sara Weir and Lynn Breaker and I got to tour UK Sanders Brown Center on Aging. And I got to see dissected brains and images, and it was really, really cool. But I learned a whole lot more about what they're doing. And I'll tell you what I was most impressed with is the red carpet that they roll out. My daughter Emily's had MRIs and surgeries and things like that. And so when someone says, oh, go to the hospital and get an MRI, I'm automatically thinking, you're just shuffled, right? Just go to the radiology department, get that MRI, let us know. It'll be a couple of weeks. But it's not that way. They take you, they walk you through there. It is a dedicated MRI for this study. They stay with you the whole time. They eat lunch with you. They whatever you need. So I was really, really impressed with that, and especially with the work that they're doing. And I'm going to let them explain it because you do not want me to explain it. Trust me. I barely grasp it, but it's amazing. That's all I can, as much as I grasp it, that is amazing. And we have Sara Weir with us from National Down Syndrome Society, and we've just had a blast yesterday, and we got to go out to eat with our We Work students last night. We took over the restaurant, and it was a ton of fun. At one point, we had 5 waiters, all with different phones, taking pictures of all of us, and yeah, it was fun. But she's going to share with us about what they're doing on a national level, especially with legislation, and also some things they're doing in relation to aging with Down syndrome. So this concludes my part. I will be running back and forth checking on children, and Ray Mizell is going to help us with tech issues. God love him. He's going to wish he'd never told me what he does for a living. So we are so glad you're here. My philosophy and what our philosophy is at ESAC is we just want to be really informal. I don't want any of us to be uptight. If you got a question, ask a question. And, you know, if you need to step out and check on your kids, it's fine. So we just want everyone to enjoy, get to know each other, and learn. So, Sara, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Sara is the president of the National Down Syndrome Society, and she can give you a little more information about her role there. You will do it much better than I.
Maybe not. Maybe not.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. It is such an honor to be here. I really want to thank Tracy as she runs out the door, and of course, Lynn and Tom for help making this happen. It's an honor to be in Lexington. This is my favorite part of my job as president of the National Down Syndrome Society, is to actually go out and meet with families, talk with our local organizations, and figure out what's happening here, talk about what we're doing at the national level, and figure out how we can support you more. I really feel strongly that our affiliates are the heart of the Down syndrome community. You are the boots on the ground. You're the first call that a new mom makes when she has a new baby, a new beautiful baby with Down syndrome, and that's really, really important. So I really feel strongly that these partnerships help us be more successful. And you'll hear throughout my presentation that I also feel strongly it takes a village to get things done in Washington, D.C., and to get things done to strengthen our Down syndrome programs across the country. So I'm really excited about meeting you all, and just thank you for taking time out of your Saturday to spend the morning with us. As Tracy said, I'm the president of the National Down Syndrome Society, so I live in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. Our headquarters is in New York City, so I often say my office is like in planes, trains, and automobiles. I spend a lot of time traveling the country, meeting with local organizations. We have an amazing team at NDSS. I'm very proud of each and every person that is a member of our staff. Lynn works very closely with several members of my team and has gotten to know a lot of them. I'm very biased, but I think we have the best team in the nonprofit business. I often get asked what my personal connection is to the Down syndrome community, and I'm always happy to answer. In fact, my favorite is I was giving a presentation to a 4th and 5th grade class a couple weeks ago in New Jersey just about Down syndrome, and it was Disability Awareness, Employment Awareness Month, and Down Syndrome Awareness Month, and I had a 4th grader go, "Why did you decide to study Down syndrome?" I'm like, "Oh, that's very perceptive." I grew up in Kansas, and I was a peer mentor to a young woman with Down syndrome, and Casey automatically became part of my family, and I became part of hers, and that was about 2 decades ago. So I've been involved with the Down syndrome community for quite some time. She's still a part of my family. I'm still doing her person-centered plan with her mom and trying to make sure that she has the best quality of life possible in Olathe, Kansas, from where I'm from. So the mission of NDSS is we're actually in the process of changing our mission. It used to be the national advocate for the value, acceptance, and inclusion of people with Down syndrome. In January, we'll launch our new mission statement, and you can see it up here, the leading human rights organization for all people with Down syndrome. When you think about NDSS and our leadership role in the community, it really is driving the advocacy and policy. And when you think about all the barriers that exist to individuals with Down syndrome achieving a full life and contributing to society, it's those outdated, archaic laws that hold our folks back from achieving their full potential. And so our organization, under our board of directors, has strategically made the decision to focus on the human rights of people with Down syndrome, whether it's in Washington, D.C. or in state capitals across the country. So I'm very excited about rolling out this new mission statement, and I think it speaks to the heart of everything that we do. At NDSS, we have 4 areas of programming. The National Advocacy and Policy Center is really run out of our DC office. We have about 4 dedicated individuals, including myself. My background is in advocacy and policy, so up until I became the president of NDSS, it'll be 2 years next month. I'll have my anniversary. I was our VP of Advocacy and Affiliate Relations, so my background is in politics and policy and advocacy, and so I'm really proud of what we're able to do and what we're able to achieve, and I'll talk more specifically about some of the legislation that we've worked on and then some of the legislation we're actually working on in this next crazy 115th Congress that'll start on January 20th in Washington, D.C. We run the National Buddy Walk program. We're very proud of our Buddy Walk. We just celebrated the 22nd year of the Buddy Walk program. We have over 250 Buddy Walks that raise $14 million for the Down syndrome community. 97% of that money stays in our local communities so that we can build the infrastructure, so we can greet new and expected parents. You can run your We Work programs and adult programs and social activities. The Buddy Walk has done a great job of fundraising and creating that infrastructure for the community across the country. We do a lot around public awareness, and that can be proactive public awareness. I'm a real firm believer in telling the real stories of people with Down syndrome. Don't get me wrong, I love to see the homecoming queens and homecoming kings and the basketball manager stories, but what I really love to see is telling the real stories of that individual with Down syndrome that's just been working his job for the last 20 years, has a 401k, IRA, and gets benefits from his employer. Because those are the stories that are really going to change perspectives and are really going to help that new mom that's sitting in a cubicle, next to that individual with Down syndrome that shows up every day and is one of the most reliable, hardworking employees on their teams. And I think we need to do more of that. On the other side of public awareness, what we do is, unfortunately, we still have to deal with ignorance in the media, with celebrities and others that mischaracterize people with Down syndrome. So if somebody says the R word, we're quick to stand out and blast them. We had a situation about, I guess it was 3 months ago, where we had an individual start a business called Special Eds in Sacramento, California. And one of our families made us aware of the situation. He went before his city council, got a business license, and started marketing his company, started putting his menu online, and his menu entailed a lot of references playing off of the terminology of his business. And we were quick to call the mayor of Sacramento and say, how did you give somebody like this a business license? We called Mr. Ed, and I actually spoke to him directly. It was one of the more interesting phone calls I've ever had in my life. We blasted him on social media. We had op-eds published in the local paper. He came out, took all of his information down offline, and it was a real educational opportunity for him to understand that it's 2016 and we can't have any of this. And so I'm really proud of the fact that we can, on a dime, turn and respond to these inappropriate situations that occur, unfortunately, day to day. So public awareness is really important because it helps educate the general public about what people with Down syndrome can do in 2016. And then we run our community outreach programs. Lynn and Tom and I have been talking about this a lot, but we really pride ourselves on putting the best information on Down syndrome, out there. These are some visuals of some of our resources and guides that we provide at NDSS. Up on the top right is our Aging and Down Syndrome Guide. We were very fortunate to receive a restricted gift about 5 or 6 years ago that's helping to sustain our efforts, our programmatic efforts around aging and Down syndrome. And so we published a beautiful guide. It was the first ever guide really to focus on the aging population in our community that talks not just about research and what's going on or clinical care, but it talks about long-term planning, housing needs, financial issues, and of course guardianship, because ultimately, and it's very, very exciting, the life expectancy of Down syndrome in the 80s, 1983, was 25. Well, today it's 60s and 70s. So a lot of the education and the outreach needs to happen on our caregivers. So right now we're partnering with the National Alzheimer's Association and the National Task Group on Intellectual Disabilities, Dementia, and Alzheimer's to produce a follow-on guide on caregivers, solely focused on caregivers, so we can educate them about the needs of our aging population. And we're actually, in light of passing ABLE and some other opportunities, we're very excited, and we're going to be launching that on World Down Syndrome Day next year. We have these beautiful inclusion posters. So when I talked about the 4th and 5th graders that I presented to at an assembly a couple weeks ago, here's some of our posters that we promote. It comes with a curriculum on how you teach young students to get to know somebody with Down syndrome in your class or on the playground. And it's a really fun, interactive way. A lot of parents take that and will take it to their schools and utilize the curriculum. My staff were happy to do that. I'm doing that actually next week for one of our ambassadors from Tucson asked me to come speak at her son's school, so we'll have a little fun with that. I'll talk about our employment initiatives and the resources that we're developing. And then, of course, we're very proud of our new and expectant parent guide. One of the changes that I've made since coming on board as president, our new and expectant parent guide is free. And we want to have any family, anybody who needs that, any affiliate, to have those open source, take the information, because a lot of times it's expensive to produce these very thorough guides. So we produce that free of charge, and we'll mail out copies to anybody that requests them. We also make it available in Spanish. And then we have the capability, and I mentioned this to Tracy too, to translate all of our materials into 130 different languages. And we can also take calls through our through our helpline up here, where if somebody does call us, we can get our translational service on the phone. We have 3 Spanish speakers on staff, but if it is not in Spanish, it's another language, we can get our translational service on the phone and do it real time, which is pretty incredible for our families. I have no idea what I just did. There it goes. I'm not checking. I've gone through 2 iPhones in the last 6 months, so it's not good. So the heart of what we do is our advocacy and policy work in Washington, D.C. and all 50 state capitals. I'm really also proud of the fact that our legislative agenda spans the lifespan of an individual with Down syndrome. Some organizations just focus on research and some focus on education. What we do is we look at the legislative issues holistically, because the educational opportunities you get at a very young age can influence your ability to be economically self-sufficient later in life. So primarily we can we break it up into 4 buckets. Healthcare and research. So that's all about improving the quality of life of an individual with Down syndrome. Kind of going back to our new mission statement, the human rights factor, and we were talking about this a lot yesterday at UK. It's improving the quality of life so you can live that long, healthy life and have all those opportunities to be fully employed, because the healthier we are, the more productive we are, and that goes for everyone. So it's a really focus on improving the quality of life and improving clinical care throughout our medical community. Of course, education, we work a lot on issues at the federal level. We just reauthorized the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or ESEA. It's also formally known, like Prince, as No Child Left Behind. It changes names like every time we reauthorize it. And right now we're focused on ESEA implementation at the state level. A lot of education is going to change in the wake of our new Congress. So when I talk about some of these issues, what happened on Tuesday really feeds into our ability to get things done in Washington. And we really take that into consideration in everything we're proactively pushing. And then sometimes we have to play things, on the defense. I still have a senator who has a nephew with Down syndrome, and his sister-in-law is actually one of our ambassadors from Alabama who introduces an amendment every time we're pushing education laws to create segregated schools. So I have to call his sister-in-law and be like, Lisa, Senator Cassidy from Louisiana did this again. And then he'll call us and be like, please stop going through my sister-in-law. You make things really hard at Thanksgiving. And I'm like, no, because it's a more effective way to call her than you. We had a 2-hour call with him a couple weeks ago on this whole FDA regulation issue that we're working on, because Republicans don't like to have more regulation and don't like to give government, more authority to regulate things. And it was quite the interesting call. ESEA, next year we're actually going to be in the process of reauthorizing the Higher Education Opportunity Act. And as we have this more, this great trend of creating more programs for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities on college campuses, we're really trying to raise the bar and get these programs accredited and also focus on making them more inclusive. It's great to go to a program, but if you're only learning life skills and you're not getting on-the-job training, opportunities for fellowships and internships, and really that career readiness, what's the point? We firmly believe that employment should be the outcome when you pursue one of these post-secondary opportunities. So we're working to figure out how we legislate that in this reauthorization. We do a lot around community integration and employment. We've done a lot. How many of you are familiar with the Ethan Saylor case out of Maryland? The young man who was tragically killed in the local movie theater. Since that happened now, it's been almost, I guess it'll be 3 years in January. Patty, Ethan's mother, is a member of our board of directors now, and we do a lot around law enforcement and first responder training. And we're working with the Department of Justice to roll out a new curriculum for law enforcement to interact with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that should be, before the new administration takes charge in January, we should have that new curriculum published. We've done a lot in Maryland because that's where it happened, to create the Ethan Saylor Alliance, to get some appropriations funding, and make sure that our self-advocates are at the table when it comes to law enforcement, because as we all know, those relationships matter. When you know somebody with Down syndrome, that totally changes your perspective of what they can do and how you should interact with them. So we've actually passed legislation that employs self-advocates. They get paid to be part of law enforcement and first responder training in the state of Maryland, and we're really proud of that and hope that we can push that out to other states. Also with community integration and employment, and I'll talk about it at the end, there's a lot of legislation we're pushing at the federal level and at the state level to incentivize employment opportunities for individuals with Down syndrome, because right now the system holds us back when it comes to creating those incentives. The incentive is to stay at home, make below $1,400 a month, well below the poverty line, so you can remain on your benefits like Social Security and Medicaid. And we really need to change that and turn that upside down and decouple the poor from the disabled in all of our entitlement programs. programs. And so there's going to be a huge focus on driving that agenda forward next year. And I do think, and we've talked about this a lot, Lynn and Tom and I, over our late nights since I've been here, that with Republicans controlling the House, Senate, and the administration, we have some opportunities to do a lot of education around creating private sector solutions to public sector problems. And that's really what, ABLE was when we passed it, which is a good segue. And I'm going to show my video now, because before I start talking about this. Now, if I remember how to go. I always like to show a video to put things in perspective. Lynn asked me to talk about the ABLE Act. How many of you are familiar with the ABLE Act? Okay, good. Okay, good. And you can stop, again, like Tracy said, I'm very informal, so please stop and ask me any questions.
I'm Sara. I'm from Moscow, Pennsylvania. It's not Moscow, Russia. People with disabilities, child syndrome, without disabilities, deserve to save money for the future, for college, or medical needs, and ABLE is for that. I authored a change.org petition calling for Congress to pass the ABLE Act. To date, it has over 260,000 signatures in counting. Of course, it's very inconvenient to meet Congress. My mom used to lobby with me. She died in February. She is one of those champions of ABLE. I feel like I have a mission now. We now have 74 co-sponsors in the Senate and 366 co-sponsors in the House.
The U.S. House has overwhelmingly passed a bill which approves the most sweeping legislation to help the disabled since 1990.
With the passing of this bill, people with disabilities can now open tax-free savings accounts.
It will affect as many as 54 million people.
It was really, really cool to see all these people come together and support something that was very important for people with disabilities. I will be standing right next to President Obama when he signs the ABLE Act into law here. What I'm saying is that keep changing the world.
That's what we say. So I love to show that video because I might need your help, Tracy.
Just hit F5, I think, at this point.
Okay. That's fine. I love to show that video because it really it articulates so well what NDSS is about, but it really tells just a brief story about why we passed the ABLE Act and why we made it our #1 legislative priority at NDSS. This story starts around a kitchen table, a local affiliate, just like the one you have here in Lexington, or you're so fortunate to have here in Lexington. We had 5 parents just after a local board meeting in Northern Virginia talking about the inequities that exist in the system. Day one, you're told, don't put any assets in your child's name. You'll disqualify them for benefits like Medicaid and Social Security. And one parent was like, we should really address this issue. This isn't fair. We have all of these financial tools to save for our typical children, but for our children that will be adults and outlive us, those are the folks that we need to make sure, are financially sound when we're no longer around. And one parent goes, let's develop some legislation, and the other parent said, well, my neighbor is Congressman Crenshaw's chief of staff, and everybody was like, well, who's that? And so Jen Sikora, who's from Florida, actually was the neighbor to John Ariely, the chief of staff for Andrew Crenshaw, and I think he was mowing the lawn one day, and Jen marched across the yard and said, hey, John, I want to talk to you about this idea we have. And his response was like, oh, my boss would love that. Andrew Crenshaw had no connection to the disability community. He was a relatively new member of Congress from Jacksonville, Florida. And they approached him and said, what do you think about this idea to create a bill that would create a savings account for people with disabilities? And his response is, that's a thing? You really can't have more than $2,000? And they said, yes, absolutely. he said, that's a no-brainer, let's do that. And so this idea really took shape around 5 dedicated parents who came up with this brilliant idea that would change the lives of 54 million people with Down syndrome. And when Andrew Crenshaw introduced the first bill, you know, he wasn't on any committees, so you've all seen Schoolhouse Rock, how a bill becomes a law. That's like what we live and breathe, you know, every day on Capitol Hill. And we had to work. And the first time we introduced it, it wasn't the ABLE Act. It was this horrible, wonky acronym, the FSAID, the Financial Savings Information Achieving. I can't even remember what it was. It was so long ago. And now it took 4 years. And in the when I met Lynn and Tom, I guess it would have been the 112th Congress, we actually changed it to the Achieving a Better Life Experience Act. We rebranded it, and we added more co-sponsors or more champions to the effort. So we really worked with Congressman Andrew Crenshaw, and it's the Republican from Florida. Kathy McMorris-Rogers is a Republican from Washington State. She now has her son with Down syndrome is 11. Congressman Pete Sessions from Dallas has a 22-year-old son, Alex, with Down syndrome. And then Congressman Chris Van Hollen from Maryland, who has no connection at all, but has been a tremendous champion for us. He's now going to be in the Senate next year, so that changes things around a little bit. And in the Senate, we actually worked with Senator Richard Burr from North Carolina and Senator Bob Casey from Pennsylvania. And Senator Casey and Sara Weir, who you just saw in that video, are both from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and they're very, very close. And Senator Casey's a tremendous champion for our organization, so that really helped kind of drive the momentum in the Senate. So it took 10 long years to get the ABLE Act done, but when we did, because of our grassroots, because of our ambassadors, because of people that made phone calls, participated in their local walks, tweeted their members of Congress, Facebooked them, did op-eds in their local paper, we had 381 out of 435 members of the U.S. House co-sponsor a disability tax bill. It's so hard to get a tax bill done in Washington. And we had 78 out of 100 U.S. senators co-sponsor this legislation, 78% of the entire Senate. It was literally one of the most incredible things, and I just have to embarrass Lynn just for 1 second. But in 2012, we thought we had a really good shot at getting ABLE done. Speaker Boehner had just returned from the election when Republicans took control of the House. It had flipped, and we're like, we had not as many co-sponsors as we had when we passed in 2014, but we had over 300 in the House. And we actually, NDSS invested about $20,000 to fly out, do a mini Hill Day, and we flew out advocates from leadership states and leadership districts to come and spend 2 days with us on Capitol Hill pushing the ABLE Act. And we were able to secure 100% of those meetings with actually members of Congress. And I couldn't find a Kentucky advocate, so I went in our database and I said, I blasted it through. And Lynn already had her email on there, and she responded back immediately. And I'm like, can you be here next week? And I think Anderson was 4 months, 5 months old at the time. And she came, as well as about 20 other advocates from across the country, many of which I had never met, weren't even involved in our ambassador program. We just needed these bodies from these districts to tell their stories. And it was one of the most incredible things. And a lot of those ambassadors or those advocates became ambassadors and come to our Buddy Walk on Washington every single year. And Lynn was our Ambassador of the Year last year and has helped recruit so many amazing advocates from Kentucky and around the country to be part of us. And I'll never forget the day. I told the story at dinner, and I won't go through it right now. But I got a call from Senator Casey's office, and my friend Jennifer said, Sarah, you'll never believe this. And I said, what? She said, it was like April or May of 2014. She said, Senator Harry Reid, who was the majority leader at the time, and Senator Mitch McConnell, the minority leader, also your senator, are going to co-sponsor ABLE, and they're going to do it on the same day, and they're going to issue a joint press release. And I was like, I was speechless. I couldn't believe it. Those two haven't agreed on anything and haven't co-sponsored anything since like September 11th legislation. This is how huge this was, and that it was for people with disabilities, and it was a tax bill. And I credit a lot to you all in this room and Lynn's leadership and the advocates from Kentucky who got in front of Senator McConnell and made him understand that this is a priority. And he's remains to this day so supportive of the work that we're doing. In fact, not many people realize, but ABLE is part of the 529 College and University Savings Plan. So if you have 529s for your other children, that's how we modeled this legislation. And he established that program about 25 years ago when he started in Congress. So he has a lot of stake in making this program successful. So since we passed it on December 19th, 2014, that's when President Obama signed the bill into law, we had to, because of the 529 aspects, we had to go to the states, and we had to pass state legislation to actually establish these ABLE programs. So since January of 2015, we've had 40 states adopt ABLE laws, which is also pretty incredible in a little over a year and a half. And I always laugh, and I get calls from other lobbyists like, hey, can you take on some of these state issues for the pharmaceutical industry or the tobacco industry? Because we've been so successful in getting this done. It's been amazing, and again, more credit to our programs and our advocates here across the country. I'd just like to show you heard Sarah's story. Sarah was very influential in helping us get this done. She started this change.org petition that received over 360,000 signatures. And those are signatures not just within the Down syndrome community, but outside, that we were able to influence and tell the world that this is a good idea. So Sarah's story is very powerful. We had the New York Times editorial board endorse ABLE. We just had amazing advocates from across the country that came to Washington year after year, and then of course, our dedicated congressional champions. This is my favorite tweet of all time. It's kind of cut off up here, but Speaker John Boehner, when he was Speaker at the time in 2014, this is how he announced that ABLE was going to the House floor for a vote, which I thought that was pretty cool. You got to stay up on the modern times. So just a couple of brief overview of the ABLE Act and ABLE accounts. So what it actually means now that we've passed this legislation, and we have 5 states that have already opened up their ABLE programs, and I'll show those to you in a minute. Each person, so each beneficiary is the individual with a disability. You can have one ABLE account, which is different than the traditional 529. The concession we made when we were moving it through the House Ways and Means markup, because it's just important that we have one account where you can protect your eligibility for benefits like Social Security and Medicaid. So when you have resources into an ABLE account, your Medicaid is never in jeopardy, and that was really, really important. It was the whole point of introducing ABLE in the first place. Your Social Security is never impacted unless you have an account that has over $100,000 in assets in it. You can only put $14,000 a year away. It's tied to the gift tax rule right now, so it's going to be a while before that would kick in for most of our account beneficiaries. You don't go off Social Security once your account reaches $100,000. Your check is just suspended, and it's going to be up to the family based on where the individual is in their lifespan to decide, does it make sense to grow the money tax-free over $100,000, or do you need that, $430 a month Social Security check? I argue, the baby born tomorrow, you're probably going to want to build that account up, as much as possible, because you're going to go to college, and that's expensive, just like everyone else. I know I still pay my student loans back every month. And then once the adult with Down syndrome reaches working age, that Social Security check might be a little bit more helpful, and you might have some more resources to pay for housing and other needs that Social Security can cover. And then once the adult with Down syndrome retires, it probably makes more sense to build the account back up over $100,000 so you can plan for long-term care and other housing, you know, when you're no longer here. But again, this is something that you can work out with your financial planner. ABLE accounts are really easy. You just go online and I'll show you all the websites that are offering accounts in those individual states that will be offering accounts by the end of this calendar year, and it's a very seamless process. So the accounts can be opened up in any state. It's actually big misconception. When we passed the federal law in 2014, it was confined to the state you live in. Last year in the tax extenders package last December, we had an opportunity with Senator Burr to change that. So we eliminated the state residency requirement. And that was really important from the disability community's perspective because we want everybody, regardless of where you live, to have access to an ABLE account. And so we've had a couple of states, we've had probably about 15 to 20 states that have actually passed ABLE laws but won't start ABLE programs. It's not financially viable in states like Delaware, Wyoming, Wisconsin, and so it was really important for an equity perspective to have everyone have access to ABLE accounts. As I mentioned, you can only put $14,000 a year into an ABLE account. It's attached to the gift tax rule, and we're really pushing our constituents, regardless if your state's going to open up or launch an ABLE program this year or next year, open up an ABLE account this year because you don't want to lose that opportunity to put money away in this calendar year. And I can talk more specifically about that and answer any questions. The contributions can come from anywhere. It can come from a grandparent, a parent. It can come from your paycheck. The money can come from anywhere, so that there's no limitations there. I talked about the $100,000, and then the funds in the account are related to the disability. So you can spend the money on housing, education, post-secondary tuition, employment training, job support, health, prevention, wellness, financial management, legal fees, funeral and burial expenses. I testified before the IRS and the Treasury Department earlier this year, was it last year? I think it was last year, late last year, and during the public comment period on the proposed regulations for ABLE accounts. And I was the first one to testify, and I got the toughest question. What can an ABLE account be used for? And I answered it, anything but like a trip to Disney World or a cruise, because anything you can relate back to the disability, clothing, food for special diets, an iPad, a smartphone, and the great thing about what Treasury has done in working with us, you can use it. They've really honored the intent of the legislation to keep it very broad, and it's self-audited. So, you keep your receipts, and if, IRS decides, they're going to come back and audit you, which I think will be very rare, you just have backup documentation that this expense was used for something that meets the criteria of our qualified disability expenses. So we're very excited about that. We also anticipate, which is also really rare, that by the end of this year we'll have final regulations on ABLE from Treasury and IRS. The 529 program that Mitch McConnell created 25 years ago has been working without final regs for 25 years. So they know that that our friends on Capitol Hill are watching them, and they have a lot of pressure to get that done. So again, since June of this year, we've had 5 states. Actually, I had to update my slides last night because Michigan launched their program last week, are offering full-flown ABLE programs. Ohio was the first state to launch their program. Theirs is the Stable account. Tennessee is ABLE Tennessee up here. Nebraska was the third. Theirs is called the Enabled Savings Plan. Florida is ABLE United, but Florida is the only state right now, and it probably will be the only state that is only offering ABLE accounts to in-state residents. They had a very generous appropriation, and they had a lot of pressure because Congressman Crenshaw is from Florida. Politics plays into all of this. to get their program launched and successful. So they've made that strategic decision. And then as of last week, Michigan launched their program, and it's MyAble. This year, over the course of, I guess it's already November, mid-November, by December 1st, we'll have about 15 other states launch their ABLE programs. We anticipate Virginia and Oregon are launching standalone programs. We've been very involved in the design of both of those programs. And then there's a consortium of about, I guess, 10 states that have joined and pooled resources and will be launching on December 1st. And as part of that program, even though like in Illinois, Kansas, and New Jersey are part of that consortium, it'll actually be marketed as the Kansas ABLE program, the Illinois ABLE program. So we're very excited, and we've been very involved in that. It's actually being led by the State Treasurer's Office of Illinois. So we're very excited about those programs that are coming online. So what's next for ABLE? You know, no program, no policy is ever perfect when you get it across the finish line. There were some really good things that we got in the final ABLE package, and there's some things that, you know, leave room for improvement. So we've been working on a series of 3 ABLE improvement laws right now, 2 of which are moving in this Congress. But the 3 bills, and I think I have a better slide. Yes. So the 3 bills, the first one is the Able to Work Act, and we're very excited about this because we feel it's very proactive to improve the ABLE program. This would allow, beyond the $14,000, it allows the working adult with Down syndrome or another disability to put his or her own paycheck into an ABLE account, up to the poverty line, which is $11,700. So we've essentially taken the limit from $14,000 to almost $26,000 a year for somebody that is working. And that bill and the ABLE Financial Planning Act, which would allow rollovers from the traditional 529 to a 529A or an 529 ABLE account, have advanced through the Senate Finance Committee. The last week Congress was in session back in September. We moved them out of committee. I could get all wonky. We discharged them with a migrant workers package. We slipped them in there. They cost about $50 million over 10 years, which is nothing. You know, we sneeze, you know, $1 million every second of our government budget, and we were able to include these. The third bill is the Age Adjustment Act, and what that does is, in order to qualify for an ABLE account, you have to have the onset of the disability before age 26. Well, the Down syndrome community, we're 100% covered, and the autism community 100% covered. But for those folks that may develop a physical disability after 26, say you unfortunately get into a car wreck or something happens and you become disabled, you wouldn't qualify. There's a lot of misconception in the disability community around conditions like MS and Parkinson's and ALS. Those are 100% qualified, or you qualify for an ABLE account as well, because you have the genetic markers and you can prove through a doctor's certification that you had the onset of the disability before age 26. Same with we work with the National Association of Mental Health in DC. A lot of mental health conditions also qualify for ABLE accounts. Unfortunately, because of the scoring for getting any legislation through, this age bill, when we got it scored back in September, cost $2 billion over 10 years, which was the entire cost of the whole ABLE program when we passed it in 2014 for the entire country. So we had to go back to the drawing board to figure out how we could have this bill basically redefined and look at the scope so we can lower the cost. And there's a little bit of, I guess, there's some controversy in the disability community right now. We have some disability organizations that are kind of trying to hold up the other 2 smaller bills from moving until the age bill moves. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. We have some amazing dedicated congressional champions on Capitol Hill that are committed to having these 2 bills move this year. And then next year we'll work as a community to get the age cost lowered and move that forward. We all want the age bill to be, we want that legislation because It helps the ABLE program become more successful. It helps us put more beneficiaries into the program. It helps us put more resources into the program. But we also have to take into consideration, what is politically viable in Washington right now. And so we've been doing a lot of meetings to move that legislation forward. So that's kind of what we're working on now. And of course, your senators and your local representatives in this area are very, very supportive of the legislation that we're moving through Senate Finance and through the House and Senate. And members of Congress will be back next week for new member orientation, so it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks. We also formed a ABLE Alliance for Financial Empowerment, because this is the first time, and it's actually really exciting, that the disability community is collaborating with the financial community, because up until 2014, we weren't really a stakeholder with financial institutions because we really couldn't have money. So now we are, we're at the table, and with ABLE it's really exciting. The disability community is not the only stakeholder when we're pushing legislation on Capitol Hill or in states. We are working with the National Association of State Treasurers, and they are administering these state programs, and then the College Savings Foundation, which is the association that represents the 529 community who manages the college and university savings program, are part of the work that we're doing. And so we formed the ABLE Alliance for Financial Empowerment with the whole goal of bringing together the disability community with the financial industry, and having, the Bank of Americas, the Vanguards, the Fidelities, all of these financial institutions that offer products to all of us understand that now people with Down syndrome and other disabilities are your stakeholder too. And so we've been working with this coalition of various organizations on the ABLE improvement bills, but to also do ABLE marketing and education. We're not going to be promoting one state program over another, but we want to market the whole program as a whole for ABLE. So that comes with a lot of marketing and education. Financial literacy, so teaching individuals with Down syndrome to manage their own money, make decisions about how their ABLE funds can be used. This is, solely goes back to our legislative agenda when we're focused on promoting economic self-sufficiency. And then that goes to the caregiver aspect too. So with our new caregiver guide that we're doing, we really want to make sure caregivers understand, how an ABLE account works and how an ABLE account is going to work in conjunction with your special needs trust. Because the caregivers are ultimately probably going to become another family member or a sibling, and it's important to understand how that works. We're doing a lot around employer engagement initiatives. We are doing a conference next year, and then of course creating a Center for Advocacy, Resources, and Education for Financial Empowerment. We have some appropriations funding with the Treasury Department right now that's going to help us do that. I won't go to all of these because I'm probably way over time. But I wanted to show you how we have individuals with Down syndrome that are already utilizing their ABLE accounts. So Ann Gerhardt was the first person in the entire country to open up an ABLE account. And they say a picture's worth a million words. I think this is worth 10 million words, because this is when Chip, who's one of our board members, and his wife Jane hit, done on the stable account application in Cincinnati earlier this year. And Anna's just a hoot, but she was the first account holder, and that was pretty cool. So Anne has been depositing money from her summer job into her ABLE account. Her grandparents have also made contributions, because again, the contributions can come from anywhere. And she wants to use her stable account to buy a new laptop. She's always on her smartphone, so she can use that. She's always texting me, Sarah, I miss you. When are you coming to Cincinnati? And then, this is so funny, but her mom gave me this. And long term, she wants to buy a condo in Cincinnati and live independently with her boyfriend, although her parents would prefer she get married first. So, Anne is a hoot. Sean is actually the first ABLE account holder in the state of Florida. You may recall my story around that kitchen table about Jen approaching the neighbor while he was mowing the lawn. This is Jen is the mom of Sean, and he is 13 years old, and they actually haven't used any funds in the ABLE account. They're just using it to save right now. But long term, they plan to use it for Sean to go on to post-secondary school, and then he could buy his own home. So a lot of our younger families are saving money in their accounts for the long term. Then I'll do. Jacob was the first account holder in Nebraska. He lives in Omaha, and I actually have to tell a quick story before I tell, you know, what Jake plans to do with his ABLE account. I was actually on a panel at Berkeley earlier, I guess back in July, earlier this summer, and I was on a panel with the head of the Ohio program and the head of the Nebraska program. And Jake and his mom, also some of our NDSS ambassadors from Nebraska, were very involved in the design of the Enable program in Nebraska. And a year before they launched the program, you know, they said, you know, Jake, well, what do you plan to use this ABLE account for? And he said, well, you know, I really want to get a new service dog. And they said, well, that's awesome. So a year went by, and they launched the program at the beginning of July, and they had already made arrangements to get him a new service dog. And Deborah, the head of the Enable program, said, you know, they asked him when they launched the program, you know, now what do you want to use your ABLE account for? And he said, well, now I need to buy a house with a backyard and a fence for my service dog. So, I mean, it's amazing, and we do get like kind of emotional for us that have been working on this for 10 years to see these state treasurers and these 529 administrators who aren't making any money on the ABLE programs, you know, today, be so invested in making these right for our families it's a beautiful thing. And Deborah, who runs this program, has become a really great friend of ours and very supportive. So Jake also has a really cool job where in Nebraska he's actually a preschool paraprofessional, and he works with other students with disabilities, and I believe he's working full time. So they're amazing. So any questions? I'll stop there, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in Washington around biomedical innovation, the CURES legislation, and our Research, Innovation, and Discovery Fund, because I think it'll be a good segue into aging and Down syndrome. But are there any questions about ABLE or any of the legislation that we're working on?
Sarah, we've had a couple of an attorney and then some people from the Human Development Institute UK come and talk to us about the ABLE account. And so we do keep some information about what you just talked about, but that might be a good handout if anyone's interested. But you know, one question that we always get asked is, so if I don't live in Ohio, how do I open an account in Ohio? But you can open it online, actually.
Yes.
So it's not like you have to drive.
It's so easy. It takes 10 minutes to set up an account.
What's going on in Kentucky with Evan? I mean, why live in Kentucky?
So I'm going to let Aunt Lynn answer that. We passed along.
You can answer me. I might be the failure in this.
No,
definitely not. No. So we just, with the changing of the governor and whatnot, we just didn't get really full support. Who asked the question? Okay. Sorry, I'll do that. We didn't get the full support financially to do it because in the middle of us trying to pass it in the state of Kentucky, we passed the rule that we could go to other states. And so when we looked at it, and being a business owner myself, I actually can really appreciate that the decision was made. That it financially made more sense that we can go across the border and we can have relationships with Ohio and we can get an ABLE account, and we don't have to bring those responsibilities to Kentucky, because there are a lot of pieces to it, and it's a lot of work. So at this point, that's where we stand. That's what we'll do. And so it doesn't create any kind of limitation. You can create an ABLE account in any of these other places, just like you would here. So,
you know, I'm a banker. I just love to keep money.
I know, and I thought, don't worry, I was the champion in the beginning, but it was a really big uphill battle. So
the other thing that states are doing, Wisconsin actually reversed. So they passed their state ABLE law to create the program. They came back this legislative session and said, actually, we're going to pass legislation to say we're not creating the ABLE program, but what we're going to offer is a huge tax deduction for anybody in Wisconsin that opens up an ABLE account in a different state. So we've actually been playing like the tax policy game across these various programs. So we have on our website, and again, we'll make sure that we get these out to everybody so you can have the links. Just going back. Yeah, so NDSS /state ABLE, we have a whole summary of all of the state plans and the tax deductions, tax credits that states are offering, so you can figure out, what is the best account for you. Virginia is going to have a pretty robust plan. They have like 75% of all of the assets in this country around 529 in their 529 program. They've hired 22 people to come on board and run their program, which is ABLE Now. So it's going to be very sophisticated, and they're going to have a lot of resources to do marketing and education, which, that is a huge factor, because we still have a lot of families, even though they know NDSS has been working on this for 10 years, that don't know about ABLE, and we just need to get the word out there. So go ahead, Lynn.
No, I was just going to say, and the word is right. So when we were trying to pass it here, we had a lot of pushback from people who said they wouldn't open ABLE accounts. And so that information was given to senators and congressmen, and he was not received very well either. So the thing that we need to do is to open ABLE accounts for our children and our loved ones, and do it in other states, and prove that, you're taking money out of the state and talking about that you're taking in the state. So and that's what we do.
When an individual was able to count to some state and Medicaid claim those in.
Yes. So right now, yes, that is what can happen. There's a provision in the ABLE law that includes a Medicaid payback. And what that means is any funds left into the ABLE account when the beneficiary passes away will go back if the state decides to collect that money. That's still very much up in the air right now, to reimburse the Medicaid program for services rendered during the time you had the ABLE account. So that wasn't a very popular provision with us. We never really wanted the Medicaid payback in the first place. But unfortunately, some other disability groups that are provider organizations that get money from Medicaid wouldn't have supported the bill 10 years ago had that not been included. Since we passed in 2014, Pennsylvania actually eliminated that provision in their state law, and we just found out. We were very excited about that, because we're like, okay, we can go state by state now and eliminate the Medicaid payback, which is what we really want to do. We want to invest in doing that. Well, Treasury and the IRS came back about 2 weeks ago and said, I'm sorry, Pennsylvania, you can't do that. So we're regrouping, and as we pass these two bills this year, we're going to be probably introducing some legislation at the federal level, just to eliminate the Medicaid payback. I don't think the savings are there. I think it's the biggest deterrent from what states are hearing from families. We don't want to open up an ABLE account because of the Medicaid payback. I argue from a financial planning perspective, if you use the account the right way and you plan for your child who will become an adult's future, and you couple it with a special needs trust, you won't have any money left in an ABLE account when the beneficiary passes away. But with that said, it would just be easier to eliminate it altogether, and I think we have a commitment to do that. So that'll be changing in the very near future.
With the changing winds in the political realm in our country, always, do you see anything that would disable ABLE accounts?
Actually,
we're starting to gear up, but if this is kind of an iffy thing on top of Medicaid applications, you know what I mean? We've got a lot of paperwork in the near future. It's discouraging. So is there anything in your gut, in your experience, that you've seen that
Yeah,
somebody would take this down?
great question, but absolutely no. Because if you go back to that one of those first slides, we had 85% of the entire Congress co-sponsor this. We've had, I mean, it's been so cool, but I've seen 3 ads, 2 of which feature people connected to our organization, of political candidates, both Democrats and Republicans, that actually talked about ABLE when they were campaigning, and all 3 of those people successfully won. We had the support of Senator McConnell, who's the majority leader, Kathy McMorris Rogers, who's our champion in the House. She is the 4th highest Republican in the House. She has a child with Down syndrome. They are so personally invested in this. Their children have ABLE accounts. This would never get overturned. Not to get too political, but ABLE really is a private sector solution to a public sector problem. There are not enough resources in Medicaid and Social Security to support our folks, and so from a Trump administration perspective, this would never get overturned. But it's a good question. Yeah. You can ask me. Yes.
Maybe more of a state level question, but if you open an ABLE Act like in the way you look at the robust program, can Becky recoup that money if it's open, because it's not, there's some money in their state, not a.
Yes.
Can they,
so,
you know what I'm saying, can they recoup those funds Medicaid?
They can.
Because
yes.
It's run under your state Medicaid, and that's the piece that we had to pass. We had to pass that we would allow ABLE accounts to work in the state of Kentucky. That was so we did have some good success, right? Because they could have blocked us completely, but yes, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Until we overturn the Medicaid clawback, yes. But I've heard from a lot of states that are said, that's probably way too much work. If the Kentucky Medicaid program wants to, what they do, because you won't have a full-fledged ABLE program here, the Kentucky Medicaid folks are going to have to figure out, okay, well, how many beneficiaries do I have in Ohio? How many beneficiaries do I have in Pennsylvania, Virginia? I think it's actually never going to be clawed back in situations, especially where you don't have an ABLE program. Because you're going to have to go to 25 states to figure it out on an annual basis. So we've kind of even created a system that's way too confusing for them to claw back. Yes.
I might not understand everything totally correctly, but my brother has a different disability. If he were to create an account, could that be transferred then to my son who has Down syndrome, or you're saying that all the funds from his account would go to Medicaid?
Another great question. Yes. So that's a very unique situation, and the only way to prevent the clawback right now is you can roll over an ABLE account to a family member that has a disability. So in your case, yes, you could take your brother's account and roll it over to your son. That's fine, but that's a very unique situation. And I mean, we kept that in there. It was in the original, what was the ABLE bill 10 years ago, and we just kind of kept that in there for consistency's sake.
Okay.
Other questions about ABLE? But again, yes.
Then the ABLE account is similar to the 529 that you can actually start your what if your young child at this point started an ABLE account, becomes a young adult that chooses not to go for post-secondary schooling and decides to work at that point, will you be able to use that money for the
Yes, absolutely. So so back to this slide, you can use the ABLE account for anything related to disability. It's just not confined to post-secondary education. It can be used to hire a job coach to support you, in your employment setting. It can be used to get to and from work, of transportation. There's limited transportation options. With health and wellness, you could even use this to buy a gym membership. So you can work out and stay healthy, special food, clothing, that sort of thing. The expenses are very, very broad. Yeah, this is down, yes. And you can use this a lot of, I highlighted a couple specific examples, but what I'm hearing a lot, we've had over 200 or 2,000 2,600 ABLE accounts have been opened up since June across the 5 programs. And I'm hearing a lot of different stories that people are already using these on a transactional basis. So they're using them on a day-to-day basis. You know, think of a health savings account that you use through your employer. This is what it's really intended to do. If you have, I'm not a financial planner, but sometimes I'm like, I play one on TV a lot, you know, because I'm talking about this all the time. But you might have a special needs trust, or that may be something you create for your child in the near future. ABLE accounts are intended to work with a special needs trust, but the way you fund a special needs trust is typically through like estates and wills. Well, you can't really dump an estate or will because it's most likely going to be more than $14,000 into an ABLE account. So you should talk to your financial planner, you know, given your individual situation, to say, you know, this is how I want my special needs trust to work, and this is how I want my ABLE account to work. But they were designed to work together. But again, not every family has the means to open up a special needs trust. You have to hire a lawyer. It costs between, you know, $6,000 and $10,000, and they're taxed at the highest income bracket. They're taxed at like 39%. You know, that could change with the Trump administration, but
and they can't be transferred from state.
Yes.
That's the most
important. 2 questions real quick.
Sure.
Would having an ABLE account set up in her daughter's name help her credit?
No, because it's gross tax free, and you know, right now she's not a taxpayer. I don't think it would help her credit. But that's a good question. I've never been asked that question.
Yeah, I've never been asked that.
Yeah. Yeah, like most of the programs have a debit card, like a health savings account, like you have your Visa or your MasterCard. Stable has one. Nebraska has one. I think Florida has one. Virginia will have one.
Second quick question. Would you be able to set up the ABLE account and use funds from the ABLE account to set up the special needs trust?
Yes. Because it's a disability-related account, so absolutely legal fees. That's a great question, too. Yeah. Yeah, I've never been asked that question. 2 I've never been asked. And I've been doing this a long time. Other questions? Okay, well, Lynn asked me to also just talk briefly, and I know we got to get to our other speakers because I've been talking way too long, to talk about kind of the research and healthcare that we're working on in Washington. And it's a very exciting time because we're on the verge of passing legislation that would accelerate the discovery, the development, and the delivery of life-saving therapies, treatments, and cures for the R&D, the drug and development R&D process in Washington. So there's this legislation, and this is not Down syndrome specific. It's called the Cures legislation, and we don't like the name, but unfortunately, Congressman Fred Upton, who's the chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, did not consult NDSS before they introduced the legislation about 2 years ago. But what it does, it creates this infrastructure for the National Institutes of Health and the Food and Drug Administration and puts more money into the system. And we're very supportive of this legislation because Down syndrome has a whole host of co-occurring conditions. You probably have heard comorbidities. We're really trying to eliminate that from our vocabulary. Co-occurring conditions like leukemia, sleep apnea, thyroid disease, you know, hearing issues, and then of course Alzheimer's and dementia later in life, and that's a good segue into the next speakers. And we're really focused on developing treatments and therapies for the co-occurring conditions associated with Down syndrome. So to the extent we can find a treatment or a better cure for sleep apnea, we know individuals with Down syndrome will be more productive in the classroom. They'll be more productive in their employment settings. Leukemia, obviously, you know, we're more prone to a form of leukemia in our pediatric population. Really important that we address that. And then, of course, you know, if we can prevent the early onset of Alzheimer's and dementia in our adults that are in their 40s and 50s, they can live longer, healthier lives. So we're very supportive of this legislation. It's actually already passed the House of Representatives. And earlier this week, I believe Wednesday, the day after the election, Senator McConnell, who dictates the floor schedule for the Senate, issued a press release saying he's committed to getting this legislation done. So we actually may be calling on you all in the next week and a half to help us contact members of Congress as well as local representatives and your senators to help push this across the finish line. There's a lot of support for this, not just from the patient advocacy community, organizations like ours, but the pharmaceutical industry, the biotech industry, AdvaMed, that represents the medical device community, are really supportive of this. It would go a long way to put more clinical trials on the map, give our academic research institutions more resources to study Down syndrome and other diseases and conditions, and then of course to promote more partnerships with the NIH, with the FDA and CDC, so we can bring government stakeholders with the private sector, specifically the pharmaceutical and biotech industry that are investing billions of dollars in these conditions and diseases. So that'll be coming up. And then I wanted to also mention about 2.5, 3 years ago at NDSS, we created a new fund. It's called our Research, Innovation, and Discovery Fund. NDSS, we were started back in 1979, and we were started more as a research organization. We were funding specific researchers to study Down syndrome. Over the course of the next 20 years, we really moved away from that. We turned into an advocacy organization. So we don't fund specific researchers or specific principal investigators. But what we do fund is research, innovation, and infrastructure. We really feel we need to give the support to our scientists and our clinicians across the country to give them the tools to be successful in their labs and in their clinics. And so we really saw this as a gap in the Down syndrome community. We focused on creating DS Connect, which is the Down syndrome patient registry hosted at the National Institutes of Health, and building on the success of getting that launched a couple of years ago. We really wanted to fund, biobanks, tissue samples, meetings to bring our researchers together to talk about Down syndrome and the priorities that need to happen. We also do about 5 or 6 research roadshows a year where we go out, we partner with our local affiliates and bring the local research community together with the National Institutes of Health and other leading researchers across the country to talk about what's going on in the research space. So we're very proud of the work that we're doing. We focus a lot on the co-occurring conditions, specifically like Alzheimer's and autism, because there's a higher prevalence of the dual diagnosis, and that also doesn't get enough attention in our community. And we funded things also like support for Lab 21, which is Dr. Mobley's data sharing platform that facilitates information exchange across our different researchers, and then funding different partnerships with other associations where we can promote the work of the Down syndrome community. So I wanted to talk about that and, anything that we can do to support UK to bring, more individuals with Down syndrome to the work that's being done here. We're very much committed to doing that. And then, of course, just educating the general public about the co-occurring conditions associated with Down syndrome. Most folks don't realize that the prevalence of Alzheimer's and dementia in our population is so high. And the more we can do to educate policymakers, the more we can do to educate other researchers and other communities, I think will go a long way. And then just lastly, I just wanted to touch on our DS Works campaign. So earlier this year, I called this our ABLE 2.0 on steroids at NDSS. We created the first ever employment campaign focused on getting individuals with Down syndrome jobs. And it's called DS Works, or hashtag DS Works, because it's 2016. You have to have a hashtag for everything. And we're really focused on 2 goals with DS Works, breaking down the barriers to getting individuals with Down syndrome jobs. And then the second prong of our goals is working with corporate America, everybody from Main Street to Wall Street, to hire individuals with Down syndrome and educate them, because we all know and love people with Down syndrome, but most employers aren't thinking, goodness, like this individual with Down syndrome would be a great employee. They're hardworking, they're structured, or they're thinking, what would they do in my place of employment? And so we're really focused on changing this upside down. But in order for us to be successful and really focus on getting individuals with Down syndrome meaningful, competitive jobs, we have to address the laws that are holding our population back. With ABLE, we addressed assets, so you couldn't have more than $2,000. Well, now you can essentially have $100,000 in an ABLE account before you jeopardize Social Security. You can have way more than that, you know, if you decide to save more than the $100,000. But what we haven't addressed in policy is income. So the income limitations for people with Down syndrome are still very, very low. They're 52 years old. When we created Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security, you can't really earn more than on average $1,400 a month before you jeopardize your Medicaid and Social Security on the earning side. Those are still very, very low, well below the poverty line. And so right now on Capitol Hill, we're driving the agenda to talk about how do we decouple the poor from the disabled. You know, these are very archaic, outdated laws, and it's time we change them because I often say it's 2016. Our folks are going to college, they're graduating with regular diplomas, they're going on to want to work, they're limited in what they can work, get married, and live independently with supports in the community. And so that really needs to be the expectation. So with DS Works, you'll see a lot more of our legislative priorities focused on this, to focus on changing the income limitations and eliminating things like sub-minimum wage, which means you can legally, not illegally, pay somebody with a disability, you know, cents on the hour to do the same job somebody else would. We've successfully eliminated it in 3 states, Maryland, New Hampshire, and Vermont, and we'll be doing a really big push in the next year to eliminate it in other states. So we have a lot of work to do around employment, and this is a huge focus of what we're working on at NDSS, and really telling the stories of what folks are doing. DS Works has 3 components. Obviously, the legislative piece is really driving what we need to do to change, but we're developing resources for our affiliates, for parents, for self-advocates on employment. You know, we're teaching our self-advocates, you know, how do you get ready for a job? How do you develop a resume? How do you go through an interview? How do you navigate for parents, go rehab? How do you prioritize employment in your IEP when you're about ready to hit 14 and go through that transition? And then, of course, the post-secondary programs are great, but if you're only teaching somebody when it's an appropriate time to call somebody on the cell phone, that's really not promoting career readiness. And so we have a lot to do in promoting resources. And then we have some really cool partnerships that we've developed with employers that are committed to hiring individuals with Down syndrome. We're working with the New Jersey Devils, who have created 6 jobs for individuals with Down syndrome in their day-to-day operations. We'll be launching that partnership in January. We're working with major companies like Voya Financial and BlackRock to not only hire individuals with Down syndrome, but to look at their benefits packages. What are they offering their employees that have children and adults with Down syndrome and other disabilities? Are they offering the best therapies, the best services? So we're looking at it holistically. And then with one company, we're looking at a matching program. So a lot of companies offer 529 matches for incentives for their employees. Well, we want them to offer ABLE matches as well. It's an equity issue. And so we're trying to create the gold standard so other employers can follow suit. So more to come on DS Works, but I definitely wanted to plug that. I think everybody has my business card. You can contact me day or night. That's my cell phone, my email. And, you know, just want you to know that, you know, NDSS, we're here for you. We want to support you in everything that you do, and it's just such an honor to be here. And just thank you, Tracy, thank you, Lynn, and thank you, everybody.
Will you just tell the group what my next initiative is?
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Behind it, because it's going to roll out and it's going to go fast, and I need everyone's help. So.
Yes, yes, oh yes, absolutely. So we work on a lot of legislation, obviously in DC, but we have some really great legislation that we're promoting in state capitals across the country, and one of which we're going to be pushing in Kentucky during the 2017 legislative session is a bill that would eliminate discrimination for organ transplants and organ transplant lists for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Doctors, you know, and other healthcare providers are still discriminating against individuals that have IEDs from their worthiness to get an organ transplant, whether you're on the list or you need a kidney transplant. Just to put a quick story on it, we've been working with a family in Carlsbad. I got a call from them about 9-10 months ago where their son, who has a dual diagnosis of Down syndrome and autism, who's 24, James, went to his doctor at UCLA. He needs a kidney transplant. And the doctor looked at the family and said, James is nonverbal. Then, I'm sorry, your son's IQ is not high enough. And he has 20 people that donate their kidneys to him. So they called us. Luckily, California is one of 3 states that already has this law in place: California, New Jersey, and Maryland. And that bill has allowed him to go forward and get his kidney transplant. He's going to be getting it at UCSD. We're very lucky. We have Dr. Mobley and Dr. Raffi there that helped us get him to the right folks so they're getting his kidney transplant. But from our human rights perspective, these are important state laws that we have to push. And so we'll be taking that legislation and doing it in Kentucky, and Lynn's leading that effort.
Yeah, we already have some pretty good support that'll go pretty fast. So if you follow me on Facebook or whatnot, just pay attention quickly because I'll need people to call and they can.
We'll also put that out through DSAC, because DSAC wants to join with that initiative and get behind you, obviously, and join that. So that's a great segue into a lot of times you see we post on Facebook or send email blasts out like, it usually has NDSS logo, contact your local, and it'll tell you how to do that. So I think this helps us all realize how important that really is to actually take that minute and make that call or send that email. And what's really exciting to me is to see that we're here on the local level, we're shuttling our children to school and to therapies and to sports, and all that is very, very necessary. And so then we have our programs locally, like our early math and literacy, and We Work, and even our social events, and we're going to start some cooking classes and healthy movement classes. So you see the home, and then you see the local affiliate, and so we're busy here, we're super busy here, and national then can take care of the hill and trickle it down to us so that our voice is still heard, because it's impossible. You can't concentrate on what we do, and I can't concentrate on what you do all the time, but we all need to be aware. So I think that helps if we're all just have it in our conscience to make sure that we all play an equally important role, whether we're in Washington or we're, cleaning the bathroom at our house. So I think that's very important for all of us to see. And I so appreciate Sara being here. We're excited when she talks about DS Work and the ABLE Act. That plays right into our We Work program, and we just graduated 6 students. Emily was one of them, and so we start now working with them one-on-one. But Sarah's absolutely right. We can do our part here and get our students prepared, but the next leg of that is preparing employers. And, it is legal for people to pay them piecework, which is cents. Per hour. And you can't do that for anyone but the disability population. That's just not right. So we can do this piece. We know people with Down syndrome are capable and want to work. We can do that. We'll work with them, but we got to also do the next piece. So it all comes hand in hand. Same with research. NIH is one of the lowest, or Down syndrome is one of the lowest funded categories in NIH. So that's still correct, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when we talk about research, that's things we've got to get behind as families, as parents, as self-advocates, and say, why is that? Especially when you look at the co-occurring conditions. So we had a blast yesterday. I loved touring the UK Sanders Brown Center on Aging. That was really, I've heard about it, I've sat on the conference calls, but to actually see it and understand it and meet Dr. Head and Roberta Davis and just see how they really do, they just care. They're very passionate about it. They're very passionate about people with Down syndrome. More than just from a research perspective, and I, as a mother, needed to hear that. I needed to see that in action yesterday. So I was just so very impressed. So again, I will not do your introductions justice. So I'm going to just ask you all to come on up and let you get started. And while they're doing that and we get their PowerPoint pulled up, there are Cokes, waters and things like that if anybody needs to move around. And we'll get your PowerPoint set up and or Ray will. Do you need electrical fluid or anything?
This one died, but it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Because it was working. Kathy was the only person on she didn't complain.
Okay.
So
Good. And is this one okay, you think?
Yep.
So just plug it in?
We can. I think that noise is your, you got
I'm have a seat. I can't take her. Okay. She's like, yeah, then you have a brother. Oh, good. And so I didn't know. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Well, let's keep it. Yeah. Yeah, we all need to hear that. Very enlightening for me. All right, good luck at the swim meet.
Well, I tell you what, Nick Johnson over at Sixth Street is
Yeah, the same age as I was away from my so I've been back 2 years now, but I now live in Georgetown. So I don't have a lot of time. I live a long time. So how long have you been?
We've had to have her here for I know a lot about so yeah, we've had that.
Yeah. I have one. I granted in my
Yeah. Our daughter was out there.
Okay, that's why I wanted to ask him. She was very troubled. Tom and I were cut out. We were but my daughter is so I don't know. Yeah. I feel like your life is like
Whatever reason.
guys I know that I feel like so that age
So we got people ready to bathroom run. All right, so we're gonna be ready to go.
We're going to go ahead and get started with Dr. Schmitt and Dr. Hess, and I'm going to run down again and check on the children. They are just angels. They're all just angels, and they are. So I will let you all introduce yourselves. Did everybody get something to drink? Okay. All right, so I'm going to let you get started.
So you're first. You have to introduce yourself first. Your name alphabetically. I learned my alphabet long ago.
That's great. I may ask you, Dr. Hess, if you all can stand as close to this as possible because that has the mic on it, and so they'll be able to hear you.
All right. My name is Liz Head. I'm a professor at the Sanders Brown Center on Aging at the University of Kentucky. I moved here in 2009, and I fell in love with the city. So in terms of this study, and looking at and working with people who are getting older with Down syndrome, my interest stemmed from my work at the University of California with Dr. Ira Lott, who's a pediatric neurologist that I think is pretty well known. Great guy. And he got me passionate about this topic. And since I've come here, I've continued this work with Fred, who's going to give you some of his background. And when you look at the two of us as a team, it kind of makes a lot of sense. I'm more of the molecular bench work kind of person, and Fred is more of the clinical end of the deal.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I didn't expect you to step away. I expected more. So historically, I've been here since the last century. And I won't give away the exact number of years, but my work in Down syndrome began in the 1970s, just to give you a perspective. And this was up in Northeast Ohio, where I did my training. And we were trying to develop early programs for work, essentially training particular work-related skills. And in those days, as you heard from Sara, that life expectancy was quite different. So we were working with adolescents, and it was rare to see a person who lived beyond the age of 25 or 30 with Down syndrome. So we were under a lot of pressure to get training programs established, get job links, and get people out in the community where they could be self-supporting. Sadly, I moved away from that area and moved to do my fellowship at a place that I'm not allowed to mention, but it's in Durham, North Carolina. And the other one is in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, which I'm also not allowed to mention. And I spent many a year there in my fellowship, but Alzheimer's disease became the area of focus. And interestingly, at that time, we knew the links between Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease. And we knew that these links were important. And so a lot of the work was being done looking at peripheral nervous system changes associated with Alzheimer proteins. You'll hear about some of those when we get into the slides. And I had the opportunity to work with the folks at Staten Island who had really the first brain tissue program in the country to study Down syndrome. This was Henry Wisniewski and Arthur Dalton, two wonderful, wonderful physicians and colleagues. And so I was able to work with them for a number of years. And then things got quiet as I moved to Kentucky. The focus, in the meantime, I had started working on AIDS dementia and had started working on other genetic forms of dementia as we identified the genes, and came here to establish a clinical trials program for Alzheimer's disease. So my job at Kentucky was far removed from Down syndrome for many years, because we were doing some of the early treatment studies for dementia, the Alzheimer's type. Essentially, when I was in training, we had no treatments. And the same can be said in Down syndrome with Alzheimer's disease. So I spent a number of years doing that. And then, as you heard, in 2009, this young woman came along who was all excited about Down syndrome. And there was a call for a proposal for a grant from the National Institute on Health to study aging and Down syndrome. By then, people were realizing that life expectancy had increased, and therefore, the co-occurrence of Alzheimer's disease was going up in the community of people with Down syndrome. So we put our heads together, and I had to dust off some of my old knowledge. I think it was still there. And we were one of the 2 awarded projects at the time. The other, UC Irvine with Dr. Lott. At the same time, the interest, as you've heard, has grown in the field. But we are now in our 7th year, if I do my math correctly, of this study. At present, we are the only study of its kind in the United States. So that's rather unique. There are other initiatives that have started that are built on ongoing programs, such as the University of Pittsburgh, Mike Raffi at University of California, San Diego. They have a growing program. There's one in Colorado. But again, the work we do at the present time is rather unique. And I'm proud to say, because Liz is so smart, other studies, including the big ones, have modeled themselves, and they won't tell you this, but if you look at our original grant and you look at what's being done now in these big consortiums, data sharing groups, she's behind it all. Everything's a copy of what she cooked up back years ago. It's true. She's being modest. So, without further ado, we want to get into the study, tell you a little bit about it. And we have some very special people here who've been with us since the beginning. And we want to give them an opportunity to talk as well. So, without further ado, and I'm assuming the enter button will do it for me.
Work for you.
So, during the first 5 years, in terms of our shared knowledge, we said, what can we do to examine the impact of growing older on the brain, particularly for people with Down syndrome? And one of the things we know from Liz's work and the work of others is that there are 2 proteins that are important in Alzheimer's disease. One protein is the beta amyloid protein, or the amyloid precursor protein. The other is what we know is the tau protein. Now, I'm not going to bore you by telling you what they do. All I can say is these are abnormal proteins, and you see them in Alzheimer's disease, and you see them in Down syndrome. But why do you see them in Down syndrome? It's because the genes that lead to Down syndrome also happen to be the gene that overproduces this protein. And so you can see this protein in the brain in people as young as 8 months. But early in life, the biology is that the protein appears to be turned over. It's not accumulating. The body is doing something wonderful. It's coping with the protein, if you will. But by the time people reach age of, say, 20, 25, we start seeing that this early A beta, as you see here, this is the abnormal part of the protein, starts to accumulate inside the nerve cells. It starts to build up. And over the next 10, 15 years, it forms into these things called plaques. This protein starts to stick to itself. And as it sticks to itself, the nerve cells surrounding it become affected. By the age of about 35 to 40, we now see the tau protein. You can see these are nerve cells. They're not healthy nerve cells, filled with the tau protein. And at this point, most people who have these 2 pathologies, not all, but most, would get a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. And again, the theory is that this is being driven by this amyloid precursor protein that's triplicated. It overproduces this. Now, I know I'm supposed to stay close to the mic, but I speak loudly. I hope you can hear me. So what happens is if you look at some of the research that's been done over the past 20 to 30 years, if we look at the percent of people with Down syndrome who have Alzheimer's disease, we see that it's very low, age 35 to 40, but it starts to go up, starting at about age 40, 45, and almost, but not quite 100% by the time people are in their 50s and 60s. And from our standpoint, as a clinician, that's what I see. I see the clinical signs of Alzheimer's disease in people as young as their 40s. And we know the brain changes of the proteins are there at that point in time. So the question was, what can we do to study this based on what we know about Down syndrome? And we came up with some interesting ideas. One of those ideas is that we know that from birth, the brain develops differently. And we know that certain areas of the brain develop more slowly. Other areas are, if you will, speaking like a neuroimager, somebody who looks at scans, other parts of the brain are plump and healthy, kind of like me. A little plump, theoretically healthy. So we said, maybe what's happening in Down syndrome that leads to an earlier age for Alzheimer's disease is due to the impact of these proteins on how the brain is wired, how things are connected in the brain. And we had new techniques using brain imaging that let us look at those connections. And so our study was geared towards, let's look at those connections, let's look at changes in those connections. Can we find things in the blood that predict those changes? And can we find things clinically when we do neurologic exams and we do thinking tests that also tell us these changes are occurring? And lo and behold, we found out after about 4 years of work that we were right. As people with Down syndrome got older, we were having changes in the connections. And this is the simplified picture of the brain. And if you look at the blue, these are the differences in people with Down syndrome versus people without Down syndrome. So those blue areas are due to trisomy 21, those connectivity differences. However, if you look at the green dots in the green areas, we see reduced connections. So FA is a fancy term for connectivity. I won't go into detail. But when people have Alzheimer's symptoms with Down syndrome versus those who don't, we see brain difference as well in how those areas are connected. And those are the green dots. And if you look at the red dots, that's where the connection changes. Connections are worse where these dots are linked to function. The BPT, the Brief Praxis Test, is something that was developed years ago by Art Dalton to measure change in Down syndrome associated with dementia. And so, lo and behold, one of our major efforts was bearing fruit. So now the question is, what can we do about that? And that's where Dr. Head will come in a minute. What's amazing about this is now you can see the connections over here. The yellow is what we would call a skeleton. It's the wiring diagram of the brain. Where you see yellow, those are pathways that connect all of the parts of the brain together and let them work in concert. It's really cool. When I got into this business, we couldn't take a picture of the brain. We had to wait for people to die and donate their brain to us. Now, I can look at blood flow in the brain, I can look at connections, I can look at structure, I can look at the chemistry of the brain, all using these new MRI techniques, and it's exciting. But what's fascinating here is, again, the same color codes as before. Blue is the difference between Down syndrome and no Down syndrome. And you can see right here with these skeletons, you can see where the blue falls right on top of those connections. And we knew this, particularly in the front of the brain. This was known developmentally for many years. But now we're actually seeing the impact. And what's even more compelling is, again, the Brief Praxis Test is here, The better you are in the brief praxis test, the better the connections, those little open diamonds. As the brief praxis test starts to decline, your measure of function, if you will, clinically, we start seeing connectivity in the brain go down as well. So we now have a target. What is changing those brain connections? And that's where we're focused now. So at this point, I'm going to let Dr. Head take over, if you're okay with that, and talk about the current 5 years. Because what we've discovered the first 5 years got us thinking about what's behind all this. And there's really some neat stuff that we're discovering that has us excited. Sadly, there's no direct treatments yet, but we're going to get there.
All right, so I told you about what we've been doing the last 5 years. And some of the other components to the last 5 years that's really helped us along quite a bit is talking to families. Because families have been telling us and giving us a few leads on what changes they've been seeing in older adults, their brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, that we've been able to kind of follow up in a research way. And I can give you some examples of that a little bit later. So as much as I hope you're learning from us, we also learn from you when we come and visit with you. So based upon some of our first sets of data showing that the frontal lobes seem to be an early place where dementia changes might happen in people with Down syndrome and are becoming disconnected, we started to ask the question, well, what's causing this? Because when we can understand what causes these disconnections, then we can maybe treat them. Because right now we don't know. Is it amyloid plaques causing the problem? Is it tangles causing the problem? Is it oxidative stress? Is it brain inflammation? I mean, there's a million things we can ask about. So anytime you write these proposals, you have to come up with a hypothesis. This is what we think is going to happen. And whether you prove it or disprove it doesn't matter as long as it pushes you forward in your knowledge. And so we started to fill in some of the gaps and came up with some more questions. And what we were thinking was, maybe oxidative stress and maybe brain inflammation are happening earlier in people with Down syndrome than what we initially predicted and might be leading to these disconnection problems. And if that's the case, these are relatively easy to target for an intervention. Antioxidants we're all familiar with, you read all the literature, take vitamin E or C, but is this really in play in people with Down syndrome? So that leads us to how we've designed our study for the next 5 years. Now, Fred told you about those frontal disconnection changes that we've been seeing. Well, we already were seeing these things happening at 35 years of age, much younger than we had predicted initially. So what we thought was we better start looking a little younger now. And so in our next 5 years, we're hoping to recruit people who are 25 years and older. Because another thing to consider, even in Alzheimer's in the general population, the earlier you start a treatment, or perhaps the earlier you take care of other medical issues that could lead to dementia, the better your chances are of staving off dementia later and later and later. Ultimately, what we hope to do is push off Alzheimer's in people with Down syndrome so far out they wouldn't experience it in their lifetime. That's the goal. And we want to do that for us too. So we are recruiting people with Down syndrome, both with and without dementia. Our current cohort is at 72 people. We're aiming for 80. So we're close, but you also have to recognize, since we're working with older people, we're also losing people. So we have to keep our cohort going. Right now, our ages are between 27 to 69 years of age. We have some very, very old folks who are in our study and have stuck with us, which has been terrific. And we have a pretty good distribution of males and females. And you can see that in terms of the intellectual disability level, we have primarily moderate to mildly impaired folks. And right now, our cohort, we have about 31% of the people who are enrolled who are volunteers for our study have dementia. So we're following them as they become progressively more demented, unfortunately. And we've been learning by seeing lots of our volunteers that it's complicated. Coming up with a diagnosis of dementia is not simple. In fact, there aren't really good criteria, and Fred can comment on this more. And that's part of the thing that we've been trying to work with, not only within our own study, but across the country and internationally. We actually collaborate with people in Spain and other countries to kind of come up with a consensus, how do we best diagnose dementia in people with Down syndrome? So one of the things we've been very, very interested in is looking at brain inflammation. Just like if you think about your immune system, if you have an injury, your immune system responds, sends out antibodies, and sends out cells that clear away garbage and parasites and bacteria. The same process happens in your brain. And for the most part, it should be good. You're trying to get rid of pathology, but sometimes it just won't turn off, and it keeps going and going and going. And your brain becomes very unhappy with this. Now, it turns out when we look at chromosome 21, there's at least half a dozen genes on chromosome 21 that are telling us that inflammation might be extremely important for people with Down syndrome, in fact, more so than perhaps we recognized before. And a lot of these genes will promote inflammation in the brain, but also some of these genes will be protective. And that's always the fascinating thing that we've been learning, is there's good and bad genes on chromosome 21. So we think inflammation might be a key component to what's driving dementia in people with Down syndrome, and we're trying to build up the evidence for this so that maybe one day we can do a clinical trial. But one of the other things we've been looking at in more detail that's evolved over time, and it's been rather surprising, is looking at vascular changes, changes in the blood vessels of the brain. Now, we always thought people with Down syndrome were protected from blood vessel disease. Their hearts are fine once corrected. They typically don't develop high blood pressure. Atherosclerosis almost never happens in people with Down syndrome. They have these great protective factors. So there weren't a lot of folks looking at vascular problems, blood vessel problems in the brains of people with Down syndrome. They just ignored that whole component. And in the big Alzheimer's world, meanwhile, this blood vessel component has become critically important. Everybody is now looking at this because it is something potentially that will be something that could be fixed or prevented in a different way that you might treat the actual Alzheimer's disease. So we designed our study now to look at this in a little more detail, and that is based upon some really surprising information we've learned lately looking at autopsy cases. I know it sounds a little scary, but we learned so much by looking at the brains of people who have been kind enough to donate to us. Those brains stay with us for decades. We never get rid of them. And by examining a series of autopsy cases from people with Down syndrome, we've been finding that they actually have a huge number of microhemorrhages in their brain as they get older. Far more than we expected, and now it's turning out to be far more than what we would see in Alzheimer's disease in the general population. This is a big deal. And so we're working with another group to kind of establish this. When we do MR imaging, we can look for those bleeds in people. This is something I think in future we can target. This is something we can target and maybe prevent with lifestyle changes. Okay? So we need to know these things so everybody has a better lifestyle that can promote healthy brain aging in the future. So, Fred, I don't know when we're doing a little tag team. But you can see really what the key things that Fred and I have in our heads when we're moving forward with the study. We're hoping we can renew this another 5 years. There was talk of retirement on Fred's part, but I might not let him. Is ultimately we want to reach, the ultimate goal of this is we want to find out what are the best targets that we can hammer on to get to healthy brain aging in people with Down syndrome. Those treatments are going to differ depending on what age a person is. So what might work for a person with Down syndrome who's in their 30s might not work when they're in their 50s, and vice versa. And maybe we want to start with really reducing all of these other potential problems, medical problems that contribute to brain aging, so that that person has a better chance of buffering the Alzheimer's disease that might come later. The other thing we're learning is that there are a lot of features of brain aging and Alzheimer's disease in people with Down syndrome that is unique to Down syndrome. So it is not something that we see in everybody with Alzheimer's. What that's telling us is we need to design clinical trials specifically for and dedicated to people with Down syndrome. And these might be very different from what we're seeing and trying in the general population. And I think that's going to be very important, especially if we think about potential adverse events that we have to keep in our heads when we move forward with this. So, Fred, do you want to just talk about some of the other possible benefits?
So, I think it's important for me at this point just to mention a couple of things about treatment in Down syndrome for Alzheimer's disease. I was involved in the development of some of the current Alzheimer's medicines. I was part of the team that helped develop a medicine called Namenda, or memantine, which is used in Alzheimer's disease, and did clinical trials with some of the earlier medicines that focus on acetylcholine. They try to boost the chemical signal in the brain that's important for memory. All of these medicines have been tried in Down syndrome with Alzheimer's disease to no avail. And I helped Pfizer put together a couple of these studies, and we hoped that we might do some good. Sadly, it didn't work. And not only, so in run-of-the-mill Alzheimer's, without Down syndrome, somewhere around 40%, 50% of people get better on these medicines for a while. Doesn't change the disease course, but they get a little better. So we were hoping to see the same thing for people with Down syndrome. Not even 10% got better. So the current medicines for Alzheimer's disease don't seem to do the job when Alzheimer's disease is present for people with Down syndrome. And that was heartbreaking for me. We put together a lot of studies. There was another study that looked at vitamin E to try to prevent progression, very large study. That also was unsuccessful. But 10 years ago, we used vitamin E, and we were able to slow down Alzheimer's progression when it was in people without Down syndrome. So it's very complicated as to what's happening biologically, what's happening to the brain. And I have a suspicion. I can't prove it, but this is a suspicion, and this is what we're trying to work on. So we know that in Down syndrome, there are co-occurring medical conditions that you see from early on. My favorite, because I did research in this area back in the 80s and 90s, is sleep apnea syndrome. We know from studies that colleagues have done, Ancoli, Israel, and California, for instance, that in the general population, if you have untreated sleep apnea and you're in your 70s and 80s, your risk to get Alzheimer's disease goes up 8 times. 8 times out of normal. That's a lot. Well, what do we know in Down syndrome? We know that sleep disordered breathing is common and occurs at an early age. When I say common, 40% or more. So this is an area that if we can develop good ways of treating, right now it's CPAP and not everybody tolerates CPAP. We have to bear in mind the physiology that comes with Down syndrome. How's the airway structured? How's the mandible structured? Are masks the way to go? Or do we need to develop programs that help people accommodate CPAP treatment? And these things occur early. The other thing we know is that since we're seeing these changes in the blood vessels, what's good for blood vessels? What's good for blood flow? Guess what? Diet and exercise. Diet and exercise, starting early, monitoring things like cholesterol levels. The good news is less diabetes, but monitoring blood sugar is important too, because blood sugar and diabetic pathways contribute to how blood vessels become fragile. So there are a lot of things we can do in terms of general health that we're very effective in treating currently, that we can bring in to people who have Down syndrome, who are at risk for Alzheimer's disease, and try to make a difference. But we have to start early to keep it healthy. The other things that we're seeing is we're seeing that there are some very unusual conditions that pop up. And I'm going to be uncharacteristically unhumble here. People who've come into our study, we have identified one of the more common problems, thyroid disease. Thyroid disease, if you have overactive or underactive thyroid and you do not have Down syndrome, your odds of getting Alzheimer's disease are double that of people who don't have it. Whoa, thyroid conditions are very common in Down syndrome. People with Down syndrome need to have their thyroid checked. We all know that now. But we are still seeing people coming into the study who have abnormal thyroid tests, and we need to get that treated. If you don't treat it, there's another disorder that can look like Alzheimer's. It's a rare disorder. It occurs whether you have Down syndrome or not. It's associated with thyroid dysfunction. And it's got a scary name, but it's a cool name. Hashimoto's encephalitis. You look demented, but you're really delirious because your body chemistry is out of whack. And we can treat that. We can go in with a course of steroids and make people better. See, for me as a clinician, that's exciting. I can't treat Alzheimer's right now, but I can treat Alzheimer's mimics. That's cool. So we need to look at these risk factors. Another risk factor that's very important, Dr. Lott is one of the experts in this area. And by the way, Dr. Head was unable to keep him from retiring, so good luck with me. That's just a side note. The seizures are important. One of the things we've seen is that seizures, the onset of seizures, new onset of seizures for people as they get older, heralds Alzheimer's changes. And for us, the question is, what's causing that? Are those seizures due to those changes in the brain blood vessels? Could be. Or is it due to the Alzheimer protein buildup? Because we see in the general population, people with Alzheimer's disease, when their Alzheimer's is severe, about 5% of them develop epilepsy. In people with Down syndrome, it's a bit more common, particularly as they grow older. We can treat seizures and seizure disorders. We have medicines that are very effective. So again, these co-occurring medical conditions that promote Alzheimer's disease and dementia, we can tackle some of those. And then we can get at the basis of what's going on in terms of these Alzheimer proteins. You want to talk about this, or should I? Okay, keep going.
You're
I'll leave my other comment alone on that. So what are the benefits to people in our study and then to the world at large? Well, we don't provide meals to the world at large, but we try to treat people who work with us as we would ourselves. So, you know, I'll take Dr. Head out for lunch and we'll talk science. We try to feed the folks who come in and spend a couple of hours with us and put up with us. Notice you don't have to put up with me that much. There's a reason for that. We've put good people in between because I spend most of my day at the hospital being grumpy. It's only on weekends I'm not allowed to be grumpy, and you can blame that on my wife. We try to cover all of the costs of the study. That's a requirement of research. We cover all the reasonable costs, the MRI, the blood work, the travel, and so forth. But more importantly, when we identify a medical condition, we send that back to the family's doctor to let them take care of it. So we've had, I think, 5 people who've had thyroid problems that we identified when they came into our study. That information went back. And every year that people come and work with us or visit with us, one of the benefits, it's like a wellness visit. All the blood lab work, that's available to the family doctor. So you don't have to worry about that as you monitor health over time. The other thing that's really neat is we've got a cool group of neurologists to work with. Dr. Robertson, some of you may have heard of his name, has been in Kentucky forever. He is one of the premier pediatric neurologists in the country, but really has done a lot of work in Kentucky over the years. And we have others, Dr. Leitner, Dr. Jaika, who are all excellent specialists. So you actually get a good medical workup and a good neurologic workup. And why is the neurologic workup important? I'm going to do it in a side note because we haven't gone full-blown into this. But one of the observations that I've had over the years, and that those pictures of the brain with the brief praxis test, part of the brief praxis test, praxis is eye-hand coordination, eye-limb coordination. So we actually test eye-hand coordination and eye-limb coordination. And lo and behold, changes in that are associated with the change due to Alzheimer's. What's really neat about this is we had observed years ago that as people with Down syndrome get older, despite the orthopedic issues, knees and hips and so forth, they have trouble walking. They become insecure on stairs or curbs. So we've just added, in the last year and a half, a way we use a computerized mat. You heard about that red carpet we roll out? It's really gray, and it's got all these sensors in it, and the people who walk on it, the computer tells us about their gait, tells us the foot pressure, tells us the spread of the gait, the rhythm of the gait, and everything. And we're trying to link this to as an early sign for the Alzheimer's changes, but also changes in the blood vessels in the brain, because those often result in a change in gait. You've seen people with a stroke. If they don't have a weakness, they still walk fine. So these are the important things. But enough said. So here you have pictures of some of our collaborators. Dr. Robertson in the hat, Dr. Janka. I know there's that young lady next to him. Dr. Powell, Dr. Caban-Holt, some of our collaborators. Not everybody is shown here. But we're still looking for volunteers. We have been very happy with the people who volunteer with us. They become family. Here's some of our other folks, Dr. Leitner, Dr. Anderson-Mooney, great pediatric neurologist, young and upcoming cognitive neuroscientist. Dr. Gold helps with the imaging, and this young lady who's hiding back there gets to take over in a minute. Dr. Lin is helping us with blood flow, brain studies, and you recognize this young lady who's standing over here. Katie is one of our coordinators. And last but not least, Dr. Wilcock, who's helping us with the genetic studies and the inflammation. So Ms. Davis is coming up to take over. We can answer a couple of quick questions. If you want information and links, there's the web page.
These folks look familiar.
Yeah.
Would you all stand up?
Stand up, get ready to talk. And by the way, you notice we have our little logo, and our participants are very proud of these T-shirts, as you can tell.
So
if you see that T-shirt, congratulate them.
I've known you for about 7 years, haven't I? Yeah. Who's standing beside you? I think they. Your sister Linda. And what do you all feel like brought you even in to be part of what we do, to try to learn more about Francis as you get older?
Yeah. Believe it or not, it was an ad in the newspaper. At that time, my mother was living with me. She and Francis both had moved into my house, and my mother got the newspaper religiously, and I happened to see the notice and show it to my mom, who is a very, very private person and does not generally want to do anything that anybody else will know about. But she was, I asked her what she thought, and she was pretty excited. She said, I think we ought to investigate this. So we called Roberta, which was the phone number, and Roberta came out to the house, and we've been involved ever since.
Your mom did a lot at the beginning of the life of once Francis became a part of your family. You want to just mention a little bit about your mom, because she's pretty spectacular.
My mom, LaRue Dillon, when Francis was born, the doctors asked that she be taken away, suggested that, and my father said absolutely not. And so she went home, and as a result of that, my mother started meeting with other moms and dads in the area, and they began the first association at that time for retarded children in Kentucky, in Lexington. And she was on the board until she was in her 70s, worked with the association as president and many other things, and then became the executive secretary for the executive director in Lexington. Until it all changed hands and changed names, and all kinds of things have happened since then. But my mother was 93 when she passed away, so she was involved most of her life. Francis was one of the first students in the first school dedicated for
Down syndrome children in Lexington before it was taken over by the public school system. And then she was also instrumental in getting the employment solutions, which I think now has another name, started. So Frances literally started school with the first school, left that school, went straight to employment solutions and worked there. She was the longest working employee there before she left. And she's had several retirement parties since then. After she left Employment Solutions, she started working at school with me and as an office aide and a teacher's helper. I teach at a private school in Frankfurt. And so the administration there was more than willing to welcome her onto the staff. And she stayed there until last spring when she was moved to an adult daycare facility while I teach.
Frances, can we take a minute and applaud your mom because if it weren't for people like your mom?
This is for your mom.
Yep.
Both of you.
I'm so thankful for your mom.
Thank you.
And I've never met her. I'm so thankful for her.
Thank you. Thank you. Frances, what do you like the most when you come to see us at UK?
Yes. What do you like the most?
Food. Great answer. Do any of those people, do you like to see any of these people?
Yeah.
Do you like to see this person?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
In fact, this morning she asked me, she said, is David Powell going to be there? I said, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
He's
pretty
I met
popular.
him yesterday. He's pretty awesome. I met Dr. Powell yesterday. He's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Tracy came to visit, and Lynn came to visit, and Sarah back there in the bright top, they came to visit. So they got to see all of the places that you see when you come to see us once a year with Linda.
Yeah.
So we can't do this without you. We just want you all to know you've helped us learn so much, and we hope that we've given you something in return.
The one thing that I would like to say is that from the very, very beginning of the study, the first thing that impressed me was that when we went in to see anybody who was there, any of the clinicians, the doctors, anybody, when the doctors and the clinicians talked to Frances instead of me.
Right. Yeah.
There was never a question of, Linda's going to answer the questions that I'm asking. They, over and over, until there was absolutely no way that they could come up with an answer, would they ever turn to me and say, could you help us? And they would ask for Frances's permission before they did that. So that was a big key for me, was how they treated and respected her. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
We're done.
Do you have any questions for Frances or Linda?
Will you share with the group why it's so important for us to be helping with the study and why you can't recruit people on your own?
You know, research, you really have to honor people and honor their private life. So they have to let us know that they want to know about it. So it's between, you know, Tracy helping families know that we even exist, and then you contact us. Or you say, hey, Tracy, it's okay for Roberta to call this person. So, you know, it's really just trying to keep ethics in research. So we can't just go out and just cold call and just contact people and solicit. So that's why we need our partners in the community to be able to just say, here's what's going on. If you're interested, call them, find out what it's about.
And the great thing is that Roberta has really helped me in my position because, you know, I get calls from people that I don't know, and they're a loved one. You know, I think 3 people I've sent to you. You know, my brother is 30, 35, 40, starting to exhibit some behaviors we've never seen before, and a lot of time they're in crisis. One family, the brother was getting ready to be expelled from his group home because of behaviors, and it just came out of nowhere. So I called Roberta, and I was like, Roberta, who do I call? She goes, me, you call me. And, you know, so she got in touch with that family, and so they were able to, it's a holistic approach. It's not just, you know, research. So I appreciate that. And
I think like Dr. Schmitt said, to know these things earlier, like how does diet affect, and Dr. Ted was sharing with us about the gait in their walking, that you may not even notice that, that they would see that. So, when Emily's 25, we'll be knocking at your door. Definitely.
So, families here that have very young people with Down syndrome, you probably know other families that do have 25-year-olds and older. Make sure they know about us, because, what you don't know is really a shame, because there's so many good things that do come out of being part of the research study.
And there's a lot of accommodations across the state. So there's other facilities in the state that can help with, traveling or doing, like if you want to talk about Bowling Green, we have some resources down there.
So what Lynn's talking about, some of the people on our team will do part of the visit locally. So we have a lady that lives in the Bowling Green area that's on our team. She's on a previous slide. I make the appointment so she can go to a place at the Down syndrome in Bowling Green, and that's where that person will have their memory thinking tested. So then when they come to Lexington, that trip is a little bit shorter. They're not doing 6 hours in one day, plus, driving from Bowling Green. So we do try to go to different places. We go to Louisville and provide some of that testing there, the memory thinking testing. The things we can't take with us are our doctors, our neurologists, our MRI, our imaging machine, and all of the team that operate that. So we have some mobility, and so that really helps some families who are busy. All of you are busy. That's, I think, the most difficult thing when I'm talking to families that have young ones. Everybody's working, Emily, she's looking for a job. She's going to be working, and I'll be saying, hey, how can we get you and Dad to come and see us? So we'll break up that 6-hour visit as much as we can. If you need to come over 2 days, because you just can't give up 6 hours. And it's once a year. So, we just really try to be flexible and meet you where you are. So thank you all for your time today. We really appreciate you.
Okay, my brain is full right now, but full of great stuff. I love that more people are coming to our coffee chats. I'm getting to know people, and I know you all are getting to know each other as well too. And it's just great hearing, that, oh, I have this connection, or I know about this, or I'll help you do that, and it makes my heart full. So I really like that. We are not going to have a coffee chat in December because my brain is full. We are going to have a holiday party, and we got Santa coming from the North Pole. Because if you have not met Santa, he is at our Christmas party. He is, no doubt about it. So that's December 10th. I am going to shamelessly plug one more thing. You've heard me talk about it. I'm going to keep talking about it. This is Club 21. We are going to encourage people to go to a monthly donation program or status to set up an automatic payment monthly to help continue to fund great things that DFAC's doing. We believe that helps you budget, and that helps us budget, and will help us to continue to do great things. And one of the great things we want to get more involved in is legislation. So we're going to start doing that with the organ donation program and things like that. So thank you all very much. Thank you to our guest speakers. You all are just awesome. We thank you so much. See those bagels and see those donuts? All right, thank you all.
Great, thank you. So nice to meet you.
Good question. Sure. My husband and I our daughter.
Yeah. I'm Jen. Praying for the capital.
Oh, sure. Yeah. That,
I sent you your own name, and that'll be on my desk. Are you on Facebook? Okay. Right, you don't want to do it. No, I don't like to and then now we all want to find that. Yeah. If you ever want to do it earlier. Okay, good. I'm going to call on you guys. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, like you have to be right. Very good. Okay, great to meet you. Thank you again for coming here. I like to she lives in here. Okay. And then, and I don't know I'm sure that you're doing a great job. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Good after you.
You gotta take a video. Tracy, you gotta go. Francis. Ooh. And I'm going to go upstairs now. Okay. Dan, you need to go to the potty? I got my clothes in here. Okay, all right, awesome. Yeah, good to see you. And, yeah. I can do break. Oh, we do. Can I do a break? Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay. Oh, this is right. Okay. You know, take it off my page. You can take it. Okay, that's how all right, y'all enjoy your weekend. I need one. So there's a cake. Yeah, yes, I want you to take one. There is a pen. Yeah. I want to be scissor. I need one. Yes, you do. I can tell. Thank you. You're welcome. Bye. 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 I'll go get it. Yeah, we'll get there. And
Yes, yeah. I only study either that or Are you going to say goodbye? Come on.
Lynn, did you think I talked to the family? There's a couple of new families in the city, You need a book and you need but not there is.
Big challenge for them.
Yeah. And she wasn't understanding work.
Are you free? Like everything? Yeah. Thank you all so much. And welcome. Oh, it'll be good. I work at the and to start out like so somebody told me about it, oh, they're gonna love it. Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, they'll have plenty to keep them busy. There she is. It went pretty well though. It did. And older kids helped a lot. It really did.
She needs like
all right, is there any time that you need hours or you know? Okay, thank you so much. All right, I appreciate it very much.
Yeah.
So I was just
Yeah, so my name will be in the packet, but the very last page is contact
Oh, did I just take one of your photos?
No, she put it in her bag. I didn't even. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate both of you. We've got a call. We do have somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm Charlotte. It's one of the
That would be great.
Yeah, I let them know that in so that I had no idea.
I'm excited.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
There's different variations. And, you know, they'll put them 2 weeks, just like everybody. 12, and then you know, high doses, long haul. So you know, this vitamin D we had this vitamin
Everybody's needing for the vitamins. I know that it's not. I swear. So,
I think
I'm here for everything. Like I went from, I was diagnosed that I
Yeah, I can't wait. I mean, I'm
Let me know if you need to
No, I
get
understand.
everything.
I'm
But not, so, you do it. I can, that's not the way. I can even see it. Underneath there, you're going to do this design, so you're going to bring it out tomorrow, right?
Thank you.
What can I help you?
I'm just kind of tidying up, picking up anything that needs to be picked up. I'll go ahead and pick up some of these things. And we had
And with Anderson, like having a 4-year-old, I have to stop my Androl so many times. I'm gonna get sick. Like I'm gonna now forget my infection. It is hard.
I can't afford that. I don't know if people bring it.
Yeah.
You know, and I have to interact and touch people, and hand washing won't stop everything. So I had to ask myself, is it worth it?
Right.
And right now, he takes the edge off the pain.
Really? Now that's interesting, because I'm a deficient of the T, but I never connected that with pain.
The inflammatory pain, yeah.
I've got it. Oh, he does? I don't know that either. Oh, yeah.
So does he have a rheumatologist?
Yeah.
So next time he sees, ask him about getting pee because
They've never mentioned that.
Where did you go?
And actually, he's not had it ever.
No, I just see my GP and I train.
My guy decided to get in like the way their practice is actually here in like
That happens everywhere.
Kyle's not had flare-ups in 3 years.
See, I got
He's off his head.
But that doesn't happen in psoriatic. No, I never felt better when I was pregnant. It was amazing, but
it's too bad my grandmother and her sisters aren't really here to running blood tests because it runs on the maternal side. My mom's got it, and she's had to have it. My grandmother and all of her sisters had it. They generally lived in the 90s and 100s. But the arthritis, when you get to the point where your hand just sticks like this and can't walk.
Yeah, check out your lovely toe.
There you go. Yeah, oh my.
And why I'm in high heels.
I was going to say, I don't wear high heels.
I only wear them.
I've got arthritis in my feet, but oh gosh.
Yeah,
but it's funny because my back feels better in a pair of heels. If I wear flat shoes, my back turns me all day long, so I pick the toes.
So go over to the swing shop on South. They put you appointments to see if they can get you something like that.
Yeah.
I just got these coolers.
Yeah.
Because of my gout.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not bad. Because I was getting the
Where is that on South Lake?
It's, oh gosh, so.
Because there's a podiatrist in Greenberg that's like a Bob podiatrist, and they carry a line of shoes.
That's the same line.
Okay.
And, Kuru, you just go on the web and they specialize in plantar fasciitis and things like that.
Now, let me tell you about that. So we have, when you were talking about antioxidants and whatnot, we have a candy water in our house. Are you familiar with that? So, my husband has plantar fasciitis. She's being a big runner, couldn't get it to go away, no matter what he wore, the socks, he did everything. She was drinking gang. I had a vascular problem that was out of control. 3 days. So we have given Anderson some it's fully alkaline water with negative electrical charge. What's your opinion about it? Good, bad?
So from me, the article published, but the rationale makes sense.
Yeah, that's what every doctor says.
And nobody's going to do the study.
Right. You're going to put everybody out of business.
So a lot of stuff is word of mouth. He was very hard. And this plantar fasciitis is associated with inflammation.
Right.
So the exercise is stretching, when you treat steroids, you can eat.
She is, right.
But she's a food. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You should drink the water, Michelle. Listen, my friend was
Get a bottle of water.
Yeah, you can come over to my house. Listen, I have my entire neighborhood drinking off of this because $5,000 for it. So but they're coming over and getting jealous because they're good for 48 hours. My entire office drinks it. I mean, I bring it to the office.
I mean, there've been different companies over the years that put oxygenating in water, but the ionic structure seems
But otherwise,
particularly here, the last stage, we've got.
Such hard water.
Yeah, and that's a challenge.
That's why we never drink the water.
So we went to the distilled water system in our neighborhood.
I can't think of the guy.
Yeah, we didn't, it was only because I'm cheap and I was on the road. 5K. I got a distilled water system.
But it's so, but even still, it's so important. It's the same concept as you have to buy, if you want rice, you have to buy it under food bed. What, bite the bullet and spend the money because you're sleeping more than 8 hours, like more than you do anything else. And the water, it's the same water, that is your whole system is water. Like, why would you put this back in your life? People spend the most money on the dumbest things in their life. Their health is, that's why I said, yeah. You wait. Stupid stuff, right? I mean, I'm really funny of it.
So we'll chat.
Okay, cool.
If you need me to do something, call.
Okay.
And I have to take this because I need your website.
Yes, there you go. And let me give you my card.
All right. I know Roberta has it, but I don't have access to Roberta all the time.
There you go. Thank you so much. Appreciate your work and what you do for spending your Saturday morning with us.
Oh, hey, it's not for me, it's for others. I wouldn't be in this business if it was for, the usual things.
Yeah. They go downstairs, but I'll take them tomorrow. Yeah, that would be lovely. And you don't have to do anything, Roberta. You can go home. It'll be fine. It'll be fine.
No, she'll feel guilty if you don't let her help. Trust me. And I'll hear about it.
Thank you so much. I'm going to Charlotte?
Yeah, I head out to Charlotte. Well, right now the plan was Monday morning, but my friends in Winston-Salem have it collared, so maybe Tuesday morning before I hit the road.
Okay.
I'm so far behind on clinic.
You may have to do
the
clinic.
This may be our last chance to get like the slides done.
Oh, yeah.
They've been spinning their wheels.
You stop doing that, huh?
It's a lack of skill.
Well, sometimes it's too many people involved.
But you do the 2 rows here, right?
Wait, why do you have 7 children?
That might be my way to say.
She's somehow expect that to be able to. She's
They go downstairs and we'll learn. Very nice.
I'll take care of it.
You can load them on the card. This is how I bring them up. I can put like I don't know if that's easier or harder than here. I can't hear you. Tracy,
Can you benefit from having any of these? I'm going to leave them with you.
okay.
I'm going to leave the brochures also.
That way, I'll have no readily available. Yeah. How old is she? Yeah. It'll be fine.
I don't know. Well, I don't know. I knew you were going to end up saying that. Like, this school is a very professional. And they're all.
And I may. They may have locked the door.
Oh. Can I help you?
Where do you live? In
Here, I can carry 2.
My hearing is going on. We're smarter than ours.
Tom, do you want to walk down?
Now, where do you want the structure?
No, the cart comes back, and you put them in the, let me know if you in the children's classroom, you know, in the
Okay, cool. That would be interesting. And then you're seeing one for that. Did you know that she was on okay.
Compression with the most kids.
Oh my God, we should use all the donuts for her. Right. We got appreciate it was great, wasn't it?
I have a lot.
One and you're right there.
Yeah, that's my
donut shop. So he worked at the bank, he worked at Fifth Bank, and his dream was to have this coffee and donut place. And
His cousin is part owner.
okay, cool. And Joe, I mean, it was like this big pipe dream, and it's so cool that it's come true. And then they were on the donut thing.
Yeah,
what do you call that? Yeah, but they were on that show. What it was called, donut. Something on one of the cooking shows, and he won the big like donut cook-off or something. No, it's not a cook-off. It's the donut challenge or something. What is her name? Rennie.
What time is your flight?
4.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Well, I already said that. I know.
I was like, oh, no. I usually work the other day, so I like eat like a bar for breakfast, and I get like a cheese nut tray.
Yeah.
And I eat hamburgers like last night.
I'm like, I know as I was going to bed, I was like, I ate macaroni and cheese for lunch.
Oh,
did I put it in your car?
It was black and my mats are black, and
I'm so sorry.
no, it was no big deal, but something kept like knocking around, and I was like, because I looked down and there wasn't anything, so, and then I was like, oh, I threw it away.
Good call. I don't want to eat it
Are we
anyway.
crazy?
And then I ordered, the dinner was good, but I ordered something so rich, and I'm like, I think I ate macaroni for lunch. It was good. It was good.